Happy Friday. Happy August 4th, 2023. This is the Sci-Fi Center Live, our Star Trek Weekly Edition, our Star Trek Strange New Worlds musical edition, the first ever musical Star Trek episode that just aired. If you were with us a couple of nights ago, you got a chance to kind of hum along with us live as it happened, as collectively split the Star Trek fandom right down the middle. You either loved it or your head was exploding at the sound of music, which either way I'm okay with because that means there's people talking about Star Trek. This would not have happened back in 2005. Had they even uttered Star Trek musical back in 2005, old Trek fan would have done what old Trek fan does, which is smother the life out of any potential Star Trek fun. But this isn't 2005. This is 2023. There's a lot of water under the bridge since they had that kind of power. And thus we end up having a lot of bold risk being taken with modern Star Trek, and I'm all there for it. So let me go ahead and bring in my fellow Trek heads, 1, 2, and 3. Of course,
What's up, everybody?
I guarantee you, out of all of us four, I guarantee you I am the ugliest one out of all four of us, and I'm showing my face, but that's fine.
Yeah, I haven't updated my background yet.
I mean, I got comic books in the background, dude. It's not like there's some luxury,
Hey, man,
like
you still
Da Vinci in the background or Mona Lisa over here. I mean,
you still have the better background, and I'm updating my my viewing areas. So,
well, Fade, you stay hidden. We already established. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Obviously, we have reconvened after watching Subspace Rhapsody live. I watched it a couple more times since then, bits and pieces of it. I watched the Trek episode. Oh yeah, I was just kidding. I really didn't want to. The Ready Room. I watched the Ready Room afterwards, and got a little bit more. I saw the choreography. I really enjoyed this episode, and like I said, I am old Trek fan. I'm just not of. It's like when you watch Land of the Lost, you had the other sleeve stacks that just hissed, and then you had Enoch, which was an intelligent sleeve stack. Even though they were the same species, we were kind of not. I really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was more than just a musical. I thought that the storylines that they were going through, just like Once More and Feeling when that aired, it wasn't just them breaking out in song. It was them telling their current storylines in song. Yeah, so I really enjoyed the episode.
well, it's like with Once More with Feeling. They spoke truth that they didn't want to speak. You know what I'm saying? So, and some of the truths that was brought out in Subspace Rhapsody, they weren't exactly comfortable with either. Like with Pike and Battelle and all that.
Yeah. Rest in peace, Patel. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. I mean.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to put up the spoiler thing, but yeah, seeing Ready Room and the teaser next to the last episode of the season. Oh boy!
By the way, that's not a spoiler. We don't know if she's dead or not, but man, when they start saying "I love you" and they start giving them a little bit more camera time, it's like, oh man.
And then it's not her first name's Marie. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
I've heard it go.
And this guy is as happy as Pike is. He's kind of doomed not to be happy. I mean, he ends up as a Hot Wheel with just his head coming out of there. So I don't know.
Eternity in the beep chair.
I mean, it just seems like this guy is headed for misery, but he keeps an upbeat attitude, knowing what's coming.
Well, I mean, eventually he does find happiness. When they take him back to Talos and he gets to live in the illusion for the rest of eternity.
Yeah, which I think isn't going to happen.
I think it's
going to happen. I think it's going to happen. I just don't think that's the end of his story. But I got another suspicion that I don't think I'm starting to believe that Strange New Worlds, no matter how long it goes on, it's not going to be Pike's show. I think eventually his storyline is going to end within the show.
Yeah, it will.
And I think Kirk takes over this show, and they're going to do whatever the hell they want. If they've established this is an alternate universe, they're going to follow along the same lines of stuff, but they're going to do what they do for the
we watched the Trek Culture earlier, and Sean was saying that even with the differences, he's realized that because time has been changed so many times, we are living in an alternate timeline, basically.
Yeah. I mean, if you watch
Yeah,
Stargate
it's
enough,
all
you know
canon.
that they're all multiple parallel universes, where slight differences occur.
So
Doesn't
all
have
the
to be
people,
linear.
that hold on to the Roddenberry Bible and say you can't do that. Yeah, you can,
You
and they've
can.
explained how you can. So
The
Well,
thing is, oh, go ahead.
go ahead, Vince.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
I was gonna say the thing that bugs me about people who bring up the Roddenberry Bible is like they've Gene was basically fired, after what, like the motion picture, until
yeah,
like
he was.
Mm-hmm.
TNG came back, and then when he died, like which was what
That's the show
32
got better.
years ago or something, they
Mm-hmm.
never really stuck to his Bible anyway. So I don't know, the people who like bring that up, like I'm like, where have you been the last 3 decades?
No,
You
I
know what I'm
mean,
saying? Like,
mhm. Now Fade and I are like doing a rewatch of TOS remasters, and within the first season, you get Spock calling himself a Vulcanian, and they're already guessing. They didn't know what canon was. No one kept to a strict storyline of certain things because it wasn't established yet. It was the first season of an experimental show, so it's like, come on, guys, loosen
like
up.
like Gene would have absolutely hated Deep Space Nine, and I consider it,
Mm-hmm.
one of the best Trek shows personally. So yeah.
Oh, yeah, and that was
Oh yeah,
made
he definitely would have hated Deep Space Nine simply because he didn't want any interpersonal conflict.
Which
Yeah, he
yeah,
wanted
and
that. The fantasy was we got past that. That was his fantasy, is that we got past that. This paradise that we were living in is in the wake of all that, and that happened years ago. So he wanted to get directly to, because he wanted to get to mankind's potential. But the reality of it is, if he were around today, the reality of it is that in order to get to that potential, you had to go through some ugly stuff, and eventually, people are going to want to know about that stuff because it's part of the history. It's like we can't explore American history without going, going over the Civil War, or going over, all the ugly stuff that's in our history. If you're going to tell the story, eventually you are going to have to get around to that stuff if you want a
Mhm.
full story. And some people don't want that. Some people do. I'm interested in all the warfare that went on because I think it is the basis of the paradise that would become Starfleet and the Federation. But it's a philosophical argument that you could go on forever and ever and ever with, you know,
Mhm.
with with um with Gene Roddenberry. They never they fired, I think, was a harsh term. They kind of put him aside, and he was more like an advisor. But Gene
It,
Yeah,
Roddenberry,
made him
at the
consultant.
point where he wasn't as good a director and a writer as the people that were around him. He was the inspiration. He did what he needed to do, but Star Trek: The Motion Picture, that was beyond what he was ever thinking that show could be. And then when you
well,
get into Next Generation, it's also a different thing because he wasn't going to outthink and outright Braga and Berman and all those guys, but he did his job though. He
well,
was
okay.
Star Trek what he needed to be.
So there's a documentary out there. It's done by his son. It's called Trek Nation, and he was going around interviewing people about his dad because he talked about he never really knew his dad, not like everybody else did. And he goes and he talks about that with some people, and then he goes and meets with George Lucas. Okay, and he asks George Lucas. He says, I was told that you and my dad actually, I was told that you said at one point that my dad and Star Trek influenced Star Wars, and he said yes, it's true. But he also talked about how Roddenberry, and then he, subsequently he was talking about himself too, that visionaries only take a canon or take a thing so far before you have to let everybody else have it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and then same thing with George Lucas.
Yeah,
George
well,
Lucas
no,
was not.
that was what George Lucas was saying
Yeah,
to Gene's son. He was saying, there's only so far we can take our creations before we have to hand it off to other people because maybe we don't see the vision. Maybe we can't create the vision, like, and then you find out that other people can't. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
And
but
also, also he found out other things in that Trek Nation thing was just talking about how, like when Berman took over fully, they talked about how Berman wouldn't let them change things that Gene wanted to do, and Berman actually still has a bust of Gene Roddenberry on his had a bust of Gene Roddenberry on his desk, and it had a ribbon put around its eyes and its ears. And he said that one day they were doing a writers meeting in his office, and they were talking about stuff that Gene wouldn't have liked for one of the shows.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, "I'm glad Gene's not here to hear this because he would have hated it." And then he wrapped that ribbon around the eyes of the bust and the ears of the bust so Gene wouldn't see or hear what the writers were talking about. And he said, and he left it that way for like 20 years. And he said, "Look, Gene may not have liked this, but it's time for us to move on." So
Yeah.
he basically said, see no evil, hear no evil, Roddenberry's statue, so they could go on from Roddenberry's ideas. And that was to show that Berman finally
ultimately,
gave up. He finally gave in and said that this is the only way we expand as an IP is to let
Yeah.
it move on from what Gene wanted us to do.
You gotta let it
I think
evolve. I
even
mean,
towards the end of his life, though, I think Gene Roddenberry was more accepting of the fact that this thing he set in motion was in motion. That was it.
yeah.
It was no longer his baby as a point to your baby grows up and starts walking, talking, and doing its own thing. I think by 1991, because he'd already seen the movies, there had already been 5 movies because the last one, 6, was released after he passed away. There had already been 5 movies. He had nothing to do with those movies. There had been a show that had been running for 4 years that he had largely not much to do with it. Another show that was in development with DF9 that he really had, but he saw all this, and I think he was at peace. Um, and if when you watch that documentary, and when you hear Major Roddenberry talk before he passed away, he was at peace with something that he had created that had basically turned into something that's like a world. After he's
Mm-hmm.
seen conventions, that he had seen all these things, he's like, "This is beyond me now, but it's because of me." And I think
Well,
Yeah.
that's the thing. That's part of what like I said, what Gene's son was talking to George Lucas about. He said, even George Lucas said, Star Wars has grown beyond me now. There's other people that could, you know,
Yeah, it's just passing the torch. They're, they may have, been the originators of it, but, now they're caretakers and
which
they
is
pass the torch on to someone else.
funny because the toxic side of the Star Wars fandom often, holds on to and they like to make George out to be the victim of Disney, and it's like, no, George got his payout. George moved on, and a lot of people don't realize that they want to play white knight for these guys, for Roddenberry and for Lucas, and they don't realize that those guys moved on. Like you said, Gene was moving on when he died, and George has moved on now. George still goes to the set though with the Disney stuff. So if he hated Disney, he wouldn't go to the set of The Mandalorian. He wouldn't go to the set of Ahsoka, and there's pictures of him on both sets.
Yeah, George is a multi-billionaire whose name will never be disassociated from Star Wars. Same thing with Roddenberry. I mean, not a multi-billionaire by the time he passed away, but he would have been the equivalent of it today. Um, Going back to this episode, and like I said the other night, this is going to be controversial depending on how you look at the story and narrative. Paul Wesley is outside of Anson Mount has been the star of this season. Even with the limited time he's been around, he's excellent in this episode, and he's excellent overall. And that's a tough role to play, given who he's playing. He's not only being Paul Wesley, he's not only being his own character, but I can see him. I can see every iteration of Kirk doing exactly what he's doing it and how he's playing it. Somehow he's doing his own thing, but at the same time, he is just as much Kirk as any of the people who played them. And I find that astonishing because that's not easy. Uh,
No,
he's great in this episode. He was great in all the episodes he's been in, even Balance of Mercy, the season finale of that, which is my favorite overall episode of the entire run so far. He's great there, even though that's not the full Kirk. And the two previous times where he's not the Kirk that we're supposed to know, he's good. And then finally, when he becomes that a horror moment where he's alongside her for that whole episode, that he was great. Trek when like I said that whole death speech where where he's talking about is like death is winning because death has robbed you of your remembering your family, remembering your friends, and that whole thing. And that's something Kirk would say. So somehow the writers of this show and Paul Wesley himself have connected to create a very credible and believable Kirk, more so than the rest of the characters. They've done it with the rest of these characters. They've done it with the rest of these characters, and even with Anson Mount's character with Pike, we don't know a lot about Pike. So
yeah, we're still learning about him.
Yeah, he's the only character that really has the license to they can really do whatever the hell they want with him. Everybody else, they've had to be very, and you have the alien, 1,000-year-old alien, what's her face, but everybody else, Uhura, we didn't get a lot out of number one. She was kind of stoic.
Yeah,
but she's rigid as she was. Yeah.
And we need we need an Ortega's episode, which we haven't gotten yet.
Yeah, I don't think we're getting it this season.
Yeah, you got
No.
Definitely not this season.
And when is the new? Oh man, we only got one more episode left.
Yeah, I know. I can't believe all this. I mean, the 9 weeks went by pretty damn quick.
Well, because of the one that they released, remember, like the Comic-Con episode threw everything off.
I mean, even if it was a full, 10 weeks, it still went by really quick. So.
Well,
I just want to say, Paul Wesley's been great as Kirk.
Yeah.
I think he's even done. I was never really that sold on Chris Pine as Kirk. Like I think he did a good job, but like I think Paul Wesley as Kirk just blows him out of the water.
Paul Wesley's done a very good job. But that being said, these actors and actresses that they've picked for this show so far have been really good, and they've really filled out the characters. I mean, God, the emotion on Ethan Peck's face when he sings the song "I'm the X."
Yeah.
That hurt. That was that because he's sitting there, he's saying, I should have just went with my gut instinct. I should have just been the analytical Vulcan that I'm supposed to be. And the whole time that he's singing that song and saying all that, Uhura's watching him, and you can tell she feels pain for him. You can tell that. You can also tell that she knows a part of Spock has died at this point. Spock tried to lean into his human side, and that's what this whole run with him on Strange New Worlds has been. And I think he just gave up on it this episode. I think he's going to let that part of himself die for quite a while until maybe he faces the Kolinahr and until he meets V'ger. Because, there were a few times in the original series where Spock was emotional, but they were like drastic times, like they were out of the ordinary times. Most of the time he just stuck to this, I'm Spock, I'm a Vulcan, analytical, logical guy, and I think he did that because he was hurt by Chapel.
Yeah, I was gonna add to your point there, they were always very brief moments.
Yeah.
Or like him dancing. Remember the episode? I don't remember the name where he's dancing, or they're in the field, and you see him smile.
Oh
yeah, with the girl.
Yeah.
We just watched that episode, didn't we, Stella?
Was it This Side of Paradise? Yeah.
This Side of Paradise, yeah.
Yeah, the one with the spores.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you see glimpses of Spock and his humanity. The one that they go back in time, they attack Kron, and married Hartley's his girlfriend for a hot second. Because Vulcans haven't evolved that far yet. He reverted a bit, so he was a little bit more emotional. But we've only seen glimpses of it, and we didn't know that he actually tried to embrace his human side before.
Well, it's also like a mock time, when he thought he killed Jim. And then he sees Kirk come back at the end there, and he's like, Jim, oh my God,
Mm-hmm.
you're alive. And but it's like Vince said, and it's what I didn't quite bring across because my brain's frazzled at the moment. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
there was only a few times that you saw Spock, the human side of Spock come out during the original series and during the movies as well. So I mean, until he touched V'ger, and then he cried, you know.
Yeah, because he finally realized what
Remember, he's been
Bijou
resurrected too.
wanted. Yeah.
He's
Oh,
also
well,
been
oh,
throwing the resurrection.
yeah.
That
Well,
happened.
that was the weird part. He finally understands his human side and everything, and then he dies, and then he gets brought back, and then I thought it was cute that Amanda said this time in your retraining, I thought I'd make sure your human side was taken care of. So that was cool.
Yeah.
And yes, Aaron, Spock was always emotional when it came to his relationship with Kirk. I mean, that's how you knew because Spock actually cared about another human being, which you don't see him doing much with others. So that
The
was that.
the two times you would always see him get emotional is the menagerie when he went to get, you know, he risked all
Like,
for Pike.
oh yeah,
You know, he risked getting court-martialed and possibly even executed for going and
oh yeah,
getting Pike and taking him back to Telos or
yeah. It's
Talos.
horrible, both places. Yeah.
And and all the times that he said, I mean, he sacrificed himself for the ship in Wrath of Khan. So I mean, and one of the last things he says to Kirk is, "I have been and always will be your friend." You
Mhm.
know, you can tell that Spock had those moments, but
Mhm.
like I said, I think it really goes back to the fact that this thing with Chapel killed him, like killed his emotions for a very long time because it was safer to be the Vulcan than it was to be the human.
Well, also there's also some things that we might not have seen yet that might add to that too. He may very well
Mhm.
lose people around him in this war with the Goran that make it to where he sees he absolutely has to turn things off from everybody, not just her. Like, say for instance, I'm not saying that this is happening, but they lose Ortegas or they lose people. Think of all the people that we don't know that exist in the future. There's a lot of
Mhm.
potential for people around him that could be lost over the next couple of years, given the circumstances. So he also may, reach to the point where if he has to emotionally detach himself from everything around him, crew wise, with the exception
Yeah.
of Captain Kirk, because of what happens to them, and because this Goran thing looks like they're making it up to be pretty serious. I don't know. I don't know if they're going to let me down with this next episode and just wrap it up in one episode and do a cliffhanger or whatever. But they built up the Goran from the beginning of the season to be this menace that they mean to have a lasting effect. So it's going to be next week is going to be very interesting. The biggest uproar that I've heard so far from just every old Trek fan is the
Mhm.
Klingon boy band thing.
Oh, the
Wow.
Batlift boys.
Yeah,
The
everybody
Batleth
I've seen
boys.
that hates it. How come they couldn't have them doing Klingon opera? I'm like, that wouldn't have been fun. I
No,
don't
that
know,
wouldn't have
dude.
been
It's
fun.
the whole point was they were out
It's
of sorts.
actually
They were out of what you would normally see them. So
it's
Yeah, but
actually one of my
remember what?
favorite moments.
Yeah, you remember like they mentioned in the transmissions like our shame, and like shame.
yeah.
What shame?
Yeah,
Well,
it's
yeah,
one of my
I'm
favorite
kidding.
moments of the episode, and it kind of reminded
Yeah.
me like if you guys have ever watched the YouTube channel Epic Rap Battles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
word
yeah.
you would never know exactly how they're gonna start singing, and that just reminded me of that, and like the whole K-pop,
Oh
phenomenon.
yeah.
The way the backup dancers drifted to the back and started dancing was hilarious.
Yeah, that was freaking hilarious. Oh, and for those who don't know, the commander is Bruce
That is Bruce
Hock.
Horak.
Correct. The guy that plays Hammer.
Hmm.
So they made sure he was kept around this season, despite Hammer going bye bye last season.
It'd be
But
funny if
this was
Hemmer's not even dead. That when we see the Gorn just took him captive.
yeah.
Who knows?
Well,
The achievement.
well, somehow he survived having hatching a Gorn egg. Things are
Or they
possible.
have ways to extract them without killing them.
Yeah.
Because remember, if they got him, then they would know how to get their own out of there, and they would use the rest of them to. Remember, they were using humans as incubators, and they had to use them over and over again. So, who knows? Like I said, this episode looks pretty intense. I mean, you see that ship is
Mhm.
completely destroyed.
Oh yeah,
She's on it, and she might be alive. I think she's going to bite
it's
the
on the
dust because that's
surface.
just going to be part of
There's
this.
actually there's actually a scene that's been shown since this season started. When they go through the reel of things that were supposed to happen through the season, you see a scene of her standing on a planet, and she looks up, and you see the Gorn ship coming into land. So
Oh, she
she's
did.
on the surface. She's on the surface. Um, and it's a trope in a lot of shows that when a couple finally gets their relationship back in order, and they get on a path, and they're going to do a thing, and it becomes more serious, one or the other dies. This has always been a trope. Now, to continue on what William was saying about the Gorn thing, I think we're going to start the Gorn War this next episode, and then I think a lot of next season is going to involve the lean into the Gorn War, like the effects of the Gorn War, and possibly even part of it. I don't know. I mean, third season could be just massively wartime. Like a couple of seasons of DS9 were.
I hope
Well,
not.
I
I
hope
don't
not
mind
either.
that for other shows. I would mind that for this show because they've been able to balance the war stuff. They let you know it was there, but if they're gonna visit the war, I'm okay with it. I hope it doesn't become like DS9. DS9's purpose was war. I don't know if that's the
Mm-hmm.
purpose of this show. I mean, they might do it anyway, but
Because the whole thing, with Arena, Spock didn't quite know who the Gorn were either, and he wasn't surprised, when he saw it on screen what the Gorn looked like at the latter part of the battle with Kirk. So I don't know. It's definitely going to be a skirmish, but I don't think it's going to be the whole third season.
I wonder what they're gonna look like because we saw the one version of the Gorn, but is that their truly evolved form?
I'm kind of hoping they lean in the. I don't know if you know what they look like in Star Trek Online, but I really like what they look like in that game.
I haven't seen them on that Star Trek Online. Let me look that
Yeah,
up.
because it looks like as the Gorn go older, they get a little slower and they become more warm blooded. But the
Or it
young
looks like
ones,
cardboard.
they're all over the damn place, So
I'm looking right now.
who knows?
Oh wow, they look kind of fearsome. But yeah, they actually look like a cross between.
Do you want to bring it up?
Yeah, hold up.
Yeah.
Let me do this real quick. Let's see, present, show screen.
And they've used assets from Star Trek Online before, so it's not unprecedented.
So there it is. Oh, am I up? This thing is so irritating. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, that looks close to like
So
what
if I can
Arena
blow that
was. No, that's good.
Oh, come on. I mean, oh wow, that's the Arena one. That looks ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have a budget. What do you want?
So, so they're showing parts of the game. Oh no, that's
Yeah, that has its own wiki there.
I wouldn't mind that. I'm wondering if that's what the other ones that we saw, the iguana looking ones. I wonder if that's what they ultimately evolve into. So, well, I guess we'll see next week. So, they also they found a way to drop in Carol Marcus reference and the fact that
that was a nice little Easter egg.
Yeah.
Which there's some people on Trek Culture, because I watched the premiere of their ups and downs, and people in the chat were like, "But he didn't know about David." And like, yes, he did.
Yes, he did. Oh, come on. Yeah, I mean,
I've
only seen.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's like, I did what you asked. I stayed away. It's like, how can you even say that?
David didn't know about him.
Right.
No.
He knew about
did.
David. Yeah, he knew about David from the time he was born. David knew about him, but he didn't know that was his father. He just saw he was a Boy Scout, astronaut. But yeah, I mean, how could anybody? Did somebody seriously say that Kirk didn't know about David?
Yep, a bunch of people
You know,
in their chat, but they also had a
Oh, in the
bunch of
chat.
like
Okay.
yeah,
they
I saw
also
what
just
you
had a
wrote.
bunch of people crapping their diapers in the chat. So
Okay,
Yeah,
so
no, I saw what you wrote in the
sorry.
chat there. That's like watch the Wrath of Khan. You'll see that the whole bit with David.
I missed what y'all were talking about because my internet lagged out. What I miss?
Mhm. No, not
The
much. We're
Carol
just
Marcus thing.
yeah.
Oh, okay. So I was gonna say something about that the night we were watching it because I didn't think about it. I was like, oh yeah, no, he didn't know about that. But then I remembered
Yes, he
when they're in the
did.
Genesis cave. When they're in the Genesis
Mhm.
cave, he said, "Is that David?"
Yeah,
And then he had the conversation with Carol where she's,
yeah.
you
I
had
just
your
went through
life and I
the
had
whole
mine,
thing
and I
there.
wanted him in mind and all that.
Mhm.
So uh, I had to think about that on the fly before I opened my mouth to say something because I was like, oh no, never mind, she knows about it, and he knows about him. But that does kind of give you a different view of Kurt during the original series.
Yeah, because he
Yeah,
knows
he
he has
knew
a
he had a
son that whole
kid.
time.
He knows he has a son, yet he's still out there traipsing around the galaxy.
He
hey,
never
hey
wanted for
William,
company.
real quick,
You know,
I put another image in the Twitter, our Twitter group of the
Okay,
Gorn. I
hold
wasn't
on.
really sure how to share, so I wasn't gonna like
I'll do it in a
try.
second. Let me hold on. I got it. Oh, there we go. Distagon.
Numbers
He's.
has a question
I'll get to
to
it in a
get the
second.
top
He's
of the.
actually he's actually asked a couple, so I'll get to his questions in a
Yeah.
second.
Well, we've answered some of it within the chat, so
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't see Paramount making another Kelvin movie. I mean, I would like to see it happen,
yeah,
but at this point, I
yeah.
just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, numbers
there.
just they may say that they're making one, but when the actors go, what? That's a big indication that it's not going to happen.
That the idea. Okay, so the idea behind the Kelvin thing, because I've been looking into it. It's stalled. If ever it'll happen. Like right now, they're just considering it stalled because they're looking for another director. But it probably will never. It's probably going to be indefinitely shelved. So
They got
Yeah,
on
plenty
the
of time to make it because they could do this as they're older. They could do this as they're heading towards with the movies that we know. They could
yeah
easily do another Kelvin. They have plenty of time to do that movie. They don't need to, and it doesn't. It could happen 5 years from now, and it would still be relevant because
right.
of the fact that what we know about that the entire history of Star Trek. Well, next time you see them, they could be wearing the red uniforms, the red army coats, or they could be in it the motion picture level of things, or maybe Kirk is an admiral by now, So
Yeah,
they have plenty of
or
time.
the only good thing that they could do to try to converge what goes on in both timelines is what happens before Kirk's promotion to admiral. You know, what happens when he does finish that last 5 year mission, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, and the purpose of another Kelvin movie would be to end the Kelvin timeline because it's no
That
longer
too.
needed.
Yeah,
It was
it's
needed when it was
it's
released, but now you don't. You didn't have a
well.
prime.
Hmm.
You didn't have another main television timeline when those movies came out. So the purpose of a fourth Star Trek movie should be to end that timeline and consolidate that timeline with what's going on now,
Hmm.
one way or another. I mean, so
Okay, so this is the image that Vince had. It's a Gorn from the online game. And
Yeah,
actually, the Gorn are a playable race in the online game.
yeah, they're part of the Klingon Defense Force.
Yeah.
so yeah, it'll be interesting to see
Cause
what they finally look like. Because, like I said, what we saw in the previous ones was like newborns; they weren't fully developed yet.
Hmm.
They weren't fully trained yet. So,
Okay, and to get to
Hmm.
numbers, other questions. Uh, the Q and Guinan's race have kind of interspersed. The Q and the Elorians have kind of interspersed through time. The Elorians get a weird feeling around the Q, like
Yeah, because of their senses and stuff, and as Vince said in the chat, they know of each other, but they didn't meet. It's just their races are adversarial, so they know of each other and are very aware of each other.
Yeah.
That's all.
Well, Guinan has she has a cosmic awareness that
Yeah.
she can see what he is. Because remember, in yesterday's Enterprise, she was the one that knew that things weren't right when no one else could because of her awareness. So
Right.
I'm assuming that awareness would cross over
Well,
with Q as well.
it's also said that that Elorians don't die unless they choose to,
Mhm.
or unless they're killed in a war or whatever. The only thing that ever the only thing that ever was destructive to the Elorians was the Borg.
Mhm.
That's pretty much it.
So yeah, Guinan and Q never really knew each other, except for during the TNG era. They never knew each
Yeah.
other from before.
Yeah, it's just the high instinct that she knew that Q was her enemy. That's all.
Oh yeah, and then plus there are minutes.
And then Numbers here, last question says, what's your guys' theory towards what is happening to Captain Sisko? He's become sort of akin to a god in a lot of ways. He ascended. Let's just say that he's a cosmic being now too, for all intents and
Which was
purposes.
the dumbest aspect about DS9, the one that just doesn't sit well with me.
I love the show, but I've always felt that they lean too heavily into like the religious aspect of it. But it's
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I
I
was
think
not
they
a
were.
fan about the way he wound up, and I was always hoping that Avery Brooks would come back and they would get a chance to correct that.
Yeah.
You know, kind of like when
Yeah,
Daniel
it
Jackson
would.
ascended in Stargate, it was stupid. So.
Yeah, and
Oh,
unfortunately, I don't think they'll ever touch on Cisco again if he won't come back. Because I think people would riot if they try to recast him.
Yeah.
He's
Well,
still
here's the
alive.
thing,
He
they
still
always-
looks the same way he does.
Yeah, he's
Well, I guess
alive.
Jake is still running the restaurant then. No,
I mean,
it was
obviously he
mentioned
should come
Cisco's
back.
restaurant.
If he's a god, he can probably time travel and do whatever he wants. But
Yeah, I think they could get Sirach Lofton to come back and play Jake, but yeah.
This is a hilarious comment, Aaron. The Gorn are reptilian humanoid aliens. The Gorn is something that makes David Icke scared at night. Oh God.
alligators. All
Mm,
right. So we have, like I said, I wish we could show a preview of the next show without getting shut off. But that's where we're at. We have
And,
one more episode left.
and Aaron
Yeah.
says here, Roddenberry wouldn't like the religious aspect of DS9 either. That was a no-no.
yeah.
I don't think he
think
would
it-
agree with it, but I don't think he would have. I don't think he would have voiced his opinion either.
No.
I think I think
No,
he
he would have kept it on the shelf for someone else to do. So.
Yeah, but that's where it is. All right, guys. Anybody got any last words about this episode?
No,
The songs are catchy. I've had the earworm in my head all day now.
Yeah, they're now available on most platforms.
You can actually find
Spotify.
you can actually find the whole album on Yahoo, not Yahoo, on YouTube Music.
And if it's
It's there.
Spotify, you download it there, give it a listen to. It's $9.99 on iTunes. And that's about it for now, I guess. And let's haphazardly looking forward to the last episode of the season.
All right.
Well, Christina Chong said when Will Wheaton asked her on the Ready Room if we were going to need a security blanket and tissue, she said all of the above.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that means his girl's dead.
So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So we're basically watching a rest in peace Captain Patel.
Yeah.
Show.
It's going to be the Captain Patel snuff film.
Yeah, and I'm not. Listen, I've seen enough Starfleet deaths, and I'm not going to cry over that. But it's going to suck. But it is a part of his development. It is part of what develops Pike into whatever he's going to become. So it sort of has to happen. So I think he'll be all right. All right, guys. We'll see you next Wednesday night, 11:45, for the final episode of Star Trek: Strange New Worlds, and then we'll figure out where we go from there. As far as Star Trek content, but I'm not going to think beyond next Wednesday night. So until next time, for Thade, for Stella, for Vince, we will see you guys for episode 10. 10, damn it. See you next week.
Live long and prosper,
Can't
folks.
do it. Can I do it? Nah, I can't do it.
Yeah, I can.